People are drawn to the unanswerable. It's just how we are. Some will even dedicate their entire lives to trying to solve the unsolvable. I think there's just something fascinating about trying to know what we could really never know. And perhaps nobody is drawn to these hypotheticals more than a sports fan. When we talk about players whose careers didn't pan out as anticipated, whether they maybe got drafted to a bad situation, or were plagued with off the field issues, or maybe even suffered a tragic injury, the question always remains the same: what if? Today, I want to talk about one of these hypothetical scenarios. It's one that I personally think about very often. Let's take a look at the Arizona Cardinals. They're a super exciting team led by young phenom Kyler Murray, who, despite running like a toddler, is a really special athlete. You probably know that the Cardinals selected him with the first pick in the 2019 draft, and it may be hard to picture Kyler in any other jersey, but I can't stress enough how much this really shouldn't have happened. And that has nothing to do with Kyler as a person or a prospect or anything, it's just that the Cardinals had literally just picked a QB in the first round of last year's draft. The Cardinals selecting QBs in back-to-back first rounds was only like the third time in history that that's happened. And it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Why would you draft a rookie and not even give him a chance to develop? It sort of defeats the whole purpose of drafting to begin with. Like, that move defies all logic. What player could even be so bad that a team would make such a stupid decision? Oh, right. Anyways, the point I'm really trying to make is that this situation is so rare that it's hard to believe that the Cardinals would have stayed on this route had Josh Rosen given them even just a little bit of hope. And if that happened, it could have changed the league as we know it. So, what if Josh Rosen wasn't a bust? To try and answer this question, we first have to decide how much better Rosen would have to be to save himself from this fate. And honestly, I don't think the answer is that much. As I mentioned before, I'm of the belief that if Rosen was anything above catastrophic, he would have got a second year. And that's what this alternate reality is going to reflect. So yeah, the title's a lie. He's still going to be a bust, but not as big of one, I guess. He's been upgraded from Josh Rosen to, like, Sam Darnold. And while I'm here setting rules and boundaries, let's just talk about trades for a second. The point of this whole experiment is to change this one thing and see how the effect ripples through the league. As such, the only time I will undo trades that happened in reality is when they no longer make any sense in the new reality. As a very simple example, if Team A traded for a quarterback in reality, but in this new universe they already just drafted one, the trade would be pointless, and as such, it won't happen. Other examples of a trade that would get nullified is one that involves a player that is no longer on the team trading them for obvious reasons. Outside of reasons such as those, there's no reason to just take guesses on if teams would trade or not, and I'm certainly not going to try and go too far into what goes through a GM's mind. This also extends to draft pick trades for the first two seasons, as most draft order changes will be minimal, making it reasonable that these trades would still happen. Though, as the ripple effect really begins to change the standings and the draft order as a result, this will start to change. Okay. Now that all of that is settled, let's take a look at our new 2018 season, which is actually just the original 2018 season. The Cardinals don't improve much, but Rosen shows just enough to convince the front office to let their rookie develop. For clarity's sake, we're going to say that the standings stay the exact same, and as such, the draft order does as well. The Cardinals still have the number one pick, but they're not so tempted to draft a quarterback anymore, instead banking on Rosen to take his year two leap. Now this is where the timelines diverge, and the league starts to look a lot different. In the draft, the Cardinals no longer need to draft a quarterback and instead opt for the consensus best player in the draft, Nick Bosa. The 49ers now miss out on Bosa, but they get an alright consolation prize in Quinnen Williams. The Jets will still address their need at defensive tackle, though this time it'll be through Ed Oliver. The Raiders still draft Clelin Ferrell for some reason, and Devin White's still the Bucs guy at 5. Now we get to the Giants. Originally they're picking Daniel Jones here, but the Giants don't even think twice now that the best QB in the draft is still on the board. The New York Giants select Kyler Murray. Upon hearing this news, Kyler announces that he is in fact going back to baseball to play for the A's. The end. Alright, just kidding. But yeah, in this universe, Kyler Murray is now a Giant. The rest of the draft changes a bit from the fallout of these picks. Jacksonville still takes Josh Allen. Detroit still gets TJ Hawkinson. With Ed Oliver off the board, the Bills now draft Jonah Williams. Pittsburgh still trades into the 10th spot to take Devin Bush, and the Bengals are left with no great O-line pick at this spot, so they bolster their defense with Brian Burns. Picks 12 through 15 stay the same, and Carolina drafts Montez Sweat at 16. From here, it's business as usual until 26, where with Sweat off the board, Washington no longer tries to trade up, leaving that pick to its original owner, the Colts. They select Jerry Tillery. The Raiders still take Abrams, and the Chargers grab Byron Murphy. The next 4 picks go the same, as is pretty much the rest of the draft. Just a few things to note. Daniel Jones now goes to the Broncos in place of Drew Lock, who becomes a Patriot later in the second round. As a result of this, the Patriots don't draft Jarrett Stidham in the 4th, but who really cares about Jarrett Stidham? Now, I know this draft didn't change that much, but it's pretty interesting to see how big of a domino effect this one thing can have on a draft. Now, the 2019 season begins, and the impacts of the draft are felt immediately. The Cardinals' defense improves drastically with Nick Bosa, but their faith in Rosen does prove to be misplaced, and they manage to scrape together only a couple of wins on their way to a top 5 pick in the 2020 draft. The benefactors of the Cardinals' mistake, the Giants, enjoy moderate success, but Kyler's still a rookie. They're not going to become champions overnight. They win 7 games, placing them in between the Browns and the Jets in the upcoming draft. Not much else changes in the standings, and that really makes sense because the draft didn't change in super significant ways. It would feel kind of dumb to start moving placements around and fucking up the universe for some minor roster changes. So besides games that the Cards and Giants took part in, let's leave the rest as it is. With all this taken into account, let's take a minute to look at the new draft order for 2021 before we see how it unfolds. Now, we head into the 2020 draft, and there's a few interesting quarterback prospects at the front of this draft, starting of course with Joe Burrow. Burrow went first in the real draft, and there is absolutely no reason to change that here. Not even an alternate universe can stop that pick. The same goes for Chase Young, who is still far too good of a prospect to pass up. Now we make it to the 3rd pick, where Josh Rosen has once again led the Cardinals to a top 5 selection, and this time the Cardinals refuse to make the same mistake twice. Rosen's gotta go. There's 2 QBs at this spot that could be great addition to the Cardinals. On one end, you have Tua Tagovailoa, who is a seemingly more NFL-ready option, but is dealing with a scary hip injury. On the other end, we have Justin Herbert. Herbert may be a bit more developmental than Tua, but the talent is obviously there. After Rosen, the Cardinals want to make sure not to take any risks, and while Herbert may take a little more time to reach his potential, the injury concerns from Tua are enough to scare them away. Justin Herbert becomes an Arizona Cardinal. The Lions still get their guy in Jeff Okudah, and the Dolphins are beyond happy to still get Tua at 5. This leaves no quarterback for the Chargers, who are more than prepared to go into the season with Tyrod Taylor because, in reality, that's what happened anyways. They'll take Andrew Thomas to bolster the O-line and give Tyrod the best chance he can get. In reality, the Panthers thought Derek Brown was their guy, and I see no reason why that should change here. The same goes for the Jags with CJ Henderson, and the Browns with Jedrick Mills. No longer having first choice of the offensive lineman, the Giants decide that Isaiah Simmons has fallen enough, leaving Mekhi Becton to land with the Jets. And now that I look at it, the draft actually once again doesn't change much from there. We of course have the luxury of hindsight, which these alternate universe GMs don't. So there's really no reason they should magically decide to pick a better or different player besides what's already been mentioned. Would it be entertaining to say, for instance, that in this world the Eagles don't become the laughingstock of the draft by picking Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson? Yeah, of course. But the Eagles have already shown us matter-of-factly who they preferred between the two. The truth is, the Eagles were going to botch this one in any universe. And with that logic applied, the boring truth is that a lot of this draft looks the same after the first picks. The trades that happened still happened, and the picks that were made were still made when it made sense. So this is what the rest of the draft looks like. And real quick, before we start talking about how the next season played out, I wanted to shed some light on the DeAndre Hopkins trade. While I was writing this, I went back and forth on if it should still happen or not. After all, the trade was a result of the Cardinals seeing that they had something special in Kyler and wanting to get him help. But after a lot of thinking, I decided that the trade should still happen. They still needed receivers regardless of who the quarterback was, and the deal for D-Hop made too much sense. So the Cardinals still get DeAndre Hopkins. Let's move on. Alright, so now our new teams get to head into the season, and some of the differences are seen immediately. While some were worried Justin Herbert might not be ready to start, he hits the ground running and instantly revitalizes the Cardinals' offense. Mixed with a defense that's improving with Nick Bosa, they become a formidable foe in the NFC and even find their way into the playoffs. Also in the NFC, the Giants are certainly better with Kyler Murray, and Isaiah Simmons is an immediate impact on defense, but with no legitimate weapons for Kyler to throw to, they hit a wall on how much more they can actually improve. Now we go over to the AFC and pay a visit to one of the unintended victims of the whole situation. The Chargers run into the same problems with Tyrod Taylor. You know, the one where the team doctor punctured his lung. They don't have anyone to step in and fill the gap, so from week 2 until Tyrod is eventually cleared to return in week 7, they are in a tough spot. They're going to lose all of these games, which actually, in reality, they did anyways, so we're cool. But even when Tyrod returns, they're still not the same team they would have been with Justin Herbert. The Chargers struggle a lot this season. As for the rest of the league, aside from a few playoff changes such as the Dolphins sneaking in somehow, nothing major changes. The Buccaneers will still beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. Let's take a minute to check out the regular season standings. And this is how it looks as a draft order. So while the back end of the draft doesn't change, the early order looks way different than what we remember. Most notably, the Chargers now possess a top 3 pick, and all of a sudden, they need a quarterback in what's a pretty exciting class. So I won't waste any time, let's get right into it. This first pick was locked in from the minute the Jags secured their spot. Obviously, they go Trevor Lawrence here. The Jets get their pick of the runner-up, and of course Zach Wilson is still their guy. Now we get to the Chargers, who get to choose between Justin Fields, Trey Lance, and Mac Jones. I've thought about this one a lot, and the only thing I can honestly say is that I don't think Mac Jones would have been the pick here. That leaves it between Fields and Lance, and honestly, I think it's a coin flip on who would have gotten picked. But I think the Chargers take their chance on Trey Lance. The Bengals still take Jamar Chase, and at pick 5, instead of Penei Sewell, I don't think the Lions can pass up on Jalen Waddle. The Dolphins are now short one Jalen Waddle, but they'll pick up Sewell as a consolation prize. And despite the change of the order, a lot of these picks still don't have any reason to change. The Eagles grab Devontae Smith a bit earlier, the Falcons scoop up Kyle Pitts, the Panthers get J.C. Horn, and the Cowboys still land Micah Parsons. The Broncos will still end up with Pat Surtain as well. Now the 49ers are on the clock, and with Trey Lance gone, their backup plan is in full effect. They grab Mac Jones, leaving the Bears with Justin Fields, which the Bears are totally fine with since they preferred Fields anyways. The rest of the draft actually does change quite a bit here, but instead of walking you through it one by one, I'll go through some highlights. And with another draft in the books and the league permanently changed, the table is set for these teams and their new rosters to enter the 2021 season. But for now, that's where I think we should call it. To go through the 2021 season with the roster changed this drastically and try to decide who would win every game would be nothing more than guesswork. And since the 2022 draft is beginning as I finish writing this, I feel like there would be no point in redrafting that class anyways. So let's review. What would happen if Josh Rosen got a second year? Well, just to name a few, Kyler Murray becomes a Giant, Isaiah Simmons becomes a Giant, Justin Herbert becomes a Cardinal, Nick Bosa becomes a Cardinal, Trey Lance becomes a Charger, Mac Jones becomes a 49er, Daniel Jones becomes a Bronco, and that's just scratching the surface. In the end, it's pretty cool to think about how even the least impactful players can affect the league in major ways. Anyways, as always, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to let me know in the comments, and if you didn't enjoy it, I guess you can tell me that too. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.